Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix, and I'm very excited because today I'm going to talk a little bit about Franz Kafka, who is a German writer who wrote in the early 1900s, and I'm also going to talk about his book, The Trial. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, I recently read The Trial, which is a book by the German writer of the early 20th century, Franz Kafka. He also wrote a book called The Castle, which is about an individual who was trying to reach access to a castle, but is unable to do so because of the bureaucracy. And he also wrote a book called America, which I read quite a few years ago, and I remember the themes of kind of picaresque living, so to speak, a kind of picaresque characterization. And he also is very famous for his short story, The Metamorphosis, which is about a person who wakes up as a bug. He wakes up as a giant bug. And it is definitely a very interesting premise for a book. Now, Kafka is super interesting because of his characterization and because of his representation of society, and not even just bureaucracy, but also the system of which could be seen as a system at large in a kind of abstract sense. And so whenever Kafka was writing, as he says in his own words, he was writing about the things that he feels in his bones, the things that he feels to be so incredibly a part of him, and there might even be an evocation there of fear or other strong and powerful emotions. He's writing about something that he feels and that his more logical faculties cannot temper. And I definitely think that this is very well captured in The Trial. For instance, because in The Trial, it very much talks about a character, K, Joseph K, who is basically tried for an undisclosed crime, with the implication being that in the trial, in this book, Joseph K is actually innocent, and that this is basically, for lack of a better phrase, a miscarriage of justice. And I find that theme to be very remarkable. Now, the reason why I like Kafka's writing is because it feels very larger than life. His writing takes a little bit to get used to because it is very disjointed and choppy in a lot of ways, which was because of the lack of editing that Kafka had for his books. In fact, he actually wanted them to be burned because he didn't want them to be published, because honestly he thought he was a failure and that he wasn't a good writer. And so it was just by luck that we were able to nonetheless, a century later, have access to Kafka's books. And so it's very interesting to think about his writing style as being very rough, but in a way that I think adds to his themes and the things in which he is describing. And so in The Trial, it is very interesting because you see this character doing everything that he's supposed to try to clear his name, and his entire life falls apart because of these accusations and because of this very cold and logical and yet also disconnected power of the bureaucracy, of this case in law. And it is sad to see a character like this railroaded. And that is exactly what happens. And I believe that the kind of fragmented style of writing, the very long sentences and very long paragraphs, captures this whole kind of stream of consciousness feel of a character who is doing his best to get through a system that is literally railroading him. And it is definitely very powerful to think about these themes in the context of our own modern life, where we have become very, I would describe, detached from our roots, and where we are definitely very detached from these larger systems at play, whether that includes the government, or law, or medicine, or education. And the reason why I very much resonate with The Trial as a novel is because it does capture this theme of alienation, of not being a part of something, of in fact being apart from it, and how these institutions alienate us. And so, to give an example of why this book is so powerful to me, I will describe the ending, which I thought was very powerful. So, what's very intriguing about this book is that Joseph is constantly blocked from proving his innocence. He is told in very confusing ways that he is somehow free, and yet he also has to go to these trials and do all of these things and jump through all of these hoops. But unfortunately, the law finally takes over, and even though he is innocent, they kill him. And so the very last chapter, which was supposed to end very abruptly because Kafka never had the chance to finish this book, he is murdered in a very graphic and violent way by these undisclosed bodyguards, so to speak, or henchmen, who are literally dragging Kafka away, or they are literally grabbing Joseph K. away, and they stab him in a very violent way, and they kill him. And I thought that the ending was very remarkable and very powerful because it was very emotional, and it captured this kind of despair. I have written this way in a lot of my writing whenever I'm trying to capture this kind of symbolic feeling of alienation and despair, and I think that Kafka captured that very well. And so the ending is very remarkable, and it definitely added a very abrupt lack of resolution to this book, where Joseph K. is doing everything that he can in his power to prove his innocence, and he is unable to. It's very remarkable that he's able to capture these things. Now, I would describe the bureaucracy as being a metaphor for humanity, or for civilization, of the ways in which we are blocked, and I thought that that was powerful, that we're blocked by different agencies and different forces from getting to the truth, and from honestly in this case, having a fair trial, which is what we should be which is what we should be given. But what's sad about this book is not only just his death, which is tragic, but also where he struggles to have the people that are part of this bureaucracy treat him with fairness and to treat him with justice. And it is tragic that this is the way that the book unfolds, where people are constantly blocking him, where there is this really bizarre scene where some people that are part of this bureaucracy are flogged, literally beaten, because of some arbitrary mistake that happens in this book. And it is scenes like this that cements this really big problem with bureaucracy and with the way that society runs itself, and how innocent people can be railroaded, and how tragic that is. Now, one thing that I would like to say in terms of this theme that I have described so far in this book is that it seems to me that in life you could use Kafka's books as a metaphor for life itself and for civilization now, where it isn't always a matter of justice, it isn't always a matter of fairness, and how things can become disordered very quickly. And with reading Kafka's work, it is very tragic to read about these kind of absurdist situations taking place with such an emotional resonance and emotional depression and despair, to realize that, yeah, like, we do get screwed over by the system sometimes, that there are many instances where we think that things will be logical, that people will be logical, and they aren't at all. If anything, they lie to us, they steal from us, they injure us, and then sometimes, as is in the case of this book, they kill us. And so this is definitely something that I would use to describe the modern situation in which we find ourselves in, where there is a lot of problems with the way that we are treated by the system, and how there is a lot of destruction that happens to our lives because of these arbitrary principles that we have no control over. And there are so many examples of this in the world, and this book is a very good analogy to that kind of thing that some of us, if not all of us, have experienced at some point in our lives. Now, I really liked this book. I think that reading the trial specifically was a very good way of kind of embodying my understanding of Kafka's works as being basically the last major work that I read by him, because I was able to follow the progression of thought, and I found this book to be immensely cathartic because of the way in which it captures these difficult elements of living in society today, and how this kind of machine reality around us of the system can, as I've said, take over our lives in a lot of horrible ways. And so I found reading this book to be very cathartic. I found the writing style to be cathartic because it was so stream of consciousness and so free, and it was focused less on rules and more about, as I said, Kafka feeling it in his bones and conveying that, writing what he felt. And so there's definitely an emotional quality to this book, and I find that to be really remarkable to read, because even though literature seems to, in a lot of ways, hold a mirror up to society and to the human condition and human nature, I found this book to just be very cathartic, because it captured for me this feeling that I've had trouble expressing for a long time about how society operates and how these systems operate, and how I know that in a lot of cases there is a lot of unfairness. I don't want to always say that it's always unfair and that justice isn't always served, but it does seem to me as though there are difficulties that I've faced in my life where I do think bureaucracies have been unfair, no matter what system that is. I think there have been a lot of cases where I haven't been heard and where I've been pummeled and crushed by these forces, and that can be a very difficult thing to have to live with. And so I would say that Kafka capturing this literally 100 years ago, before the outbreak of World War I, is a really remarkable theme to capture, to convey, for what I think is a more universal thing. Granted, it's definitely different in the 20th and 21st centuries as compared to previous generations and centuries, but I do think that that analogy is very real in our modern times, and I think that it is basically a parable of our times, with capturing this issue that we face when it comes to dealing with systems. And what is so fascinating is that Kafka probably didn't even think that he succeeded. He probably didn't even think that he was a good writer and that he'd captured these things, and literally over 100 years later, I'm able to understand these things in a new way. I'm able to understand through literature what I have felt and have barely been able to articulate, if articulate at all. And so yeah, I definitely recommend reading Kafka, and you can read it in any order you like, but I would recommend familiarizing yourselves with other short stories of Kafka, such as The Hunger Artist and Metamorphosis. But I think that this might be my favorite book by Kafka. I'm not sure, because I like his work overall, but it might be my favorite book because of what it captures. So yeah, I definitely recommend The Trial. Out of 5 stars, I would probably give it a solid 5 stars, because I think it captured something that is really hard to articulate, but that Kafka was able to reveal and show through his writing. And even though he may have never thought of himself as a good writer, I think that he was probably too hard on himself, and circumstances were definitely working against him. Because as his day job, I believe he was an insurance clerk or some kind of clerk in the bureaucracy, and so he definitely knew what it was like in day-to-day life in these kinds of settings. And so it is amazing that he was able to use that experience to express himself and to create art. So yeah, I'm Phoenix. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion about Kafka and about Kafka's work. And yeah, I encourage you to check out other videos on my YouTube channel, and I hope that you enjoyed. I'm Phoenix. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.